Well, good evening, everybody. This is meteorologist Andrew Pinero in this final episode of my How to Drive Manual series. So, this episode, we're really going to be talking about maintenance and a little bit of a look back from episodes 1 through 6. So, we'll just recap a little bit and I'll put up some of the clips from the episodes. So, let's start with episode 1. That was just getting going. That one, I just really showed overall what the pieces look like together with How to Drive Manual. I had the GoPro on as well, so I was able to show you from my perspective driving what it kind of looks like, shifting, the foot pedals, all the rev matching and stuff like that, which brought us to episode 2, which was the rev matching itself. And with rev matching, especially with downshifting, that was something very important because if you don't match those revs perfectly, then you can have this very jerky kind of a ride. And also that kind of wears out the parts, which will be today's episode. We're talking about a bit more about maintenance. Then episode 3, we talked about the hill start. And with the hill start, it's a little bit easier in more modern manual transmissions that have a little bit of something called hill assist, where essentially the ABS, the anti-lock brake system, that is what holds the wheels in place while you're stepping off the brake. So you're not on the brake and you have the parking brake, the hand brake, you have that down, but the car's computer keeps holding the brakes for a little bit. So that's essentially what the hill start. Episode 4, we talked about the clutch. And in episode 4, I have my good friend Stanley, who has his own YouTube channel. He's got like 20,000 subscribers on there. And he was very shocked, just like I was, with some of the parts. And with the parts, we had the pressure plate, the flywheel, and the clutch. All those together was very interesting to take a look at. Next, we talked about heel-toe downshifting. And heel-toe downshifting in episode 5 was something I'm still not mastering. It's become a little bit better, but it does have its advantages, specifically when you're coming off a highway and you're on the exit ramp slowing down, going down the gears. That is where heel-toe downshifting kind of comes in handy. Also, it's a bit more for racing. When you're trying to go around a corner, you're coming up to a corner and trying to go around it, that's where heel-toe downshifting really comes up. Then episode 6, we talked about engine braking, and we talked about the difference between braking and braking. But that one, engine braking is essentially a good thing. When you're engine braking, you're not using any fuel. The vacuum created by the pistons with no fuel actually keeps the car slowing down even though you're not on the brake. Then, while you have the wheels spinning, because in manual transmissions, the wheels and the engines are pretty much directly connected to each other. If the car is moving and the wheels spinning, the engine's spinning. So essentially the engine's running without using gasoline. And that brings us to episode 7 on maintenance. So, the biggest thing I want to show you again is that clutch setup. So in terms of maintenance, this is the pressure plate. These are springs, and the little shiny part there in the middle, that's where a round bearing would be sitting. So that bearing will wear out. These springs will wear out. On this side, this is very smooth. Essentially, it's like a disc brake, the disc part of the brakes. It's mostly smooth on this. There's some rough parts up on the top, but overall it's not terrible. But this will wear out too. So the pressure plate is one thing that will have to be replaced. The main connection point now between the engine and the transmission, the clutch. Now it's not as big as you may think, especially since all of the engine's power has to transfer through this. And this is essentially a brake pad, just a big brake pad. And brake pads wear out, clutches wear out. So this will have to be replaced eventually too. And the last part, which is very heavy, the flywheel, it's essentially a giant chunk of metal. so it won't really wear out too easily. But the two things that may, this is the other side of where the clutch makes contact. So this it's basically, again, like a disc brake. This is smooth right now, but if it's not smooth, that may need to be resurfaced or the flywheel may need to be replaced. Also, there's these little gears, it looks like, on the edge. That's where the starter actually starts spinning the engine. They don't wear out that often just because it's solid metal, but they can. The clutch, probably going to be the first to wear out because it is, as you're driving it, you're wearing it out, just like the brakes. Maybe next would be the pressure plate, because as you press the springs in and out, whenever you're pressing that clutch pedal, you start slowly wearing out those springs. So eventually that'll need to be replaced. And then the flywheel probably won't need to be replaced, but if you keep the vehicle 100, 200,000 miles, that may be something that needs to be replaced or just part of a whole engine rebuild. So those are some of the main maintenance parts. Now, there's one other, difference you could say between automatic and manual transmission service parts. So I'm going to put that up right here. This is called a synchro or a synchronizer. This is what allows the input and output shaft of the transmission to synchronize together. So when the engine is connected with the clutch, you have the input shaft and the engine connected, but then the output shaft is connected to the wheels and they may be spinning at a different rate. That's where you're choosing gears, say 1 through 6, to allow the input shaft and the output shaft to have a different ratio, a gearing ratio. The synchro there allows a smooth connection. Otherwise, that's where an older car, like I'm talking 50s and 60s manual transmissions, when you're trying to shift gears, that's where you hear that grinding, that kind of sound when you're shifting gears. That doesn't really happen too much on newer cars because of the synchro. Essentially, it's another clutch. Most of the time, it's made out of brass, and it's a friction fitting, so it allows the input and output shaft to slowly come up to the same level, or the gear itself. When you're engaging the gear between the input and the output shaft, there's something called dog teeth, and that actually is what engages the gear. You're allowing that gear to match between those input and output shafts. So that's a friction fitting, just like the clutch. That will wear out too, but not as often. So the clutch is really designed to wear maybe about 60,000 miles, but the brass fittings there on the synchros maybe can go 70, 80,000 miles before they need to be replaced. But when they do, they're a pain to get to because essentially you have to remove the transmission from the car and completely disassemble the whole transmission just to get to those synchros. Then in there, because you have gears as well, especially if you're just learning how to drive manual and you might not engage properly, you might have the gears wearing out. A lot of times I hear this more from things I've read, second gear. Second gear, for some reason, seems to be the gear that wears out. And that one, if it wears out, that's where you start hearing the grinding. That can happen. But you may be thinking I'm getting pretty down. Actually, let me take that down now. You may be thinking I'm getting pretty down on the manual transmission, but overall, it's better than an automatic in terms of maintenance. Because there's not that many moving parts. Even though, yes, there are a lot of moving parts in a manual transmission. Nothing, though, like an automatic transmission. Because you have valves in an automatic transmission. You have the differential, which is that fluid-based, the torque converter. Sorry, not the differential. You have the torque converter, which is a fluid coupling. That may need to be changed out here and there. Then you have inside the planetary gear set, which is a whole bunch of gears, little gears, orbiting around one big ring gear. And then you have the valve train I'm not exactly sure if that's what it's called, but of the automatic transmission, you have a lot of these little tubings and little balls that kind of go in and out like ball bearings that'll turn a valve off or turn a valve on. So automatic transmissions are a lot more complicated. They're easier to drive because they do a lot of the stuff on their own, but they're more complicated itself. So when something goes wrong with an automatic transmission, it's more expensive to fix. With the manual transmission, a lot of these parts can be very easily taken in and out, just like the clutch and the pressure plate. You don't have to completely take the transmission out of the car to do that. If something goes wrong with an automatic transmission, you're probably taking that completely out of the car. The only thing would be those synchros, but the synchros you really don't have in a manual transmission you have to worry about until 70,000, 80,000 miles, which my friend Stanley, who was in episode 4 with the clutch, his BRZ is a 2013, and he, I think, is just over 70,000 miles, and when he's starting to shift gears second into third, I think that's what he was saying, there's some grinding that he's hearing, which is probably those synchros failing. So that's something he's going to have to be taken care of. So overall, the manual transmission in terms of maintenance is a little bit better than the automatic because it ends up in the long run being a bit cheaper. It's not as easy to work around and not as easy to use, but I hope all 7 episodes of this kind of give you a good idea about driving manual transmission. Maybe inspiring you to get out there and try getting a rental car for manual and try and drive it for a couple days. Overall, though, to really get a feel for manual transmissions, I would definitely say you want to at least have one for a couple of weeks. Once you start daily driving one for a couple of weeks, you really start getting the feel for it. So that's what I started with. First car I owned with manual was this WRX. And after a couple of weeks, it really started to feel better. And now, had it over a year, I just passed my 1-year anniversary with the WRX, and it feels natural. And a lot of times, I'm not even thinking when I'm changing gears. It just feels automatic to me. But overall, I hope this series, you enjoyed the series. I hope it really helped you guys. If you want to see any kind of other series, 6-7 part series like that, definitely leave that in the comments below. Otherwise, have a great evening. This is meteorologist Andrew Pinero, and I'll see you guys in the next one.